A 2023 Federal Reserve survey found that 41% of Americans earning over $100,000 a year still describe themselves as just getting by, not struggling in the traditional sense. No missed payments, no overdrafts, just a persistent, low-grade feeling that the math should be working better than it is. That feeling has a name. It just isn't the one most people expect. Here's what was happening. Almost all of that accumulated savings, for most households, is sitting in two places: their home and their 401k. That's their employer retirement account. Neither one puts a dollar in their pocket each month. They have wealth they can see but not spend, and the bills don't care about net worth. So why does this keep happening to people who did the work? The answer comes down to a flaw in the goal itself. For decades, we've been taught to chase a big number, a net worth target, as if crossing that line is what creates security. But net worth is a snapshot. It tells you what you own at one moment in time. It says nothing about whether you can pay for next month. That gap between what you're worth on paper and what actually lands in your account is what this video is about. If you don't understand the difference, you can spend 30 years building something that still leaves you anxious at 62. My name is Alex, and if you've ever looked at your savings and still felt financially exposed, stay with this, because the number you've been optimizing for may be the wrong one entirely. I'm going to show you how net worth and cash flow actually work differently, and why one of them funds your life while the other just looks good on paper. Once you understand which one to build first, you'll start making decisions with a completely different set of criteria. And here's where it starts to get interesting. The two concepts sound related. People often use them interchangeably. They are not the same thing, and the difference between them shapes everything. Most people think they understand money because they understand their paycheck. That's a reasonable assumption. It's also where the confusion starts. There are two completely different ways to measure your financial position. Most of us only track one of them, and the one we ignore is usually the one that actually determines how our life feels day to day. The first is net worth. The formula is straightforward. You add up everything you own: your home, your investment accounts, your car, whatever cash you have sitting around, and then you subtract everything you owe: your mortgage balance, your car loan, any credit card debt or student loans still on the books. What remains after that subtraction is your net worth. It is a single number, a total, a snapshot of where you stand at one specific moment in time. The second is cash flow, and this one works completely differently. Cash flow is not about what you own. It is about what moves. Every month, money comes in. Your salary, maybe some rental income, a side project, whatever your sources are. And every month, money goes out. Rent or mortgage, groceries, utilities, subscriptions, insurance, all of it. If what comes in exceeds what goes out, you have positive cash flow. If it goes the other way, you have a problem, regardless of what your net worth says. Here's a way to think about it that actually sticks. Net worth is like a photograph of your finances. It captures one moment. It tells you what the balance sheet looks like right now. Cash flow is the video. It shows you the motion, whether money is flowing toward you or away from you, whether the trend is strengthening or quietly eroding. You can have an impressive photograph and a very troubled video. That combination is more common than most people realize, and this is not a theoretical concern. A 2026 report from the Consumer Financial Research Institute found that roughly 63% of American households with a net worth above $500,000 carry a monthly cash flow deficit at least 6 months out of the year. That means more than half of the people who look financially successful on paper are regularly spending more than they earn, not because they are reckless, because the way we are taught to measure financial health points us toward the photograph and ignores the video entirely. Take someone like a mid-career engineer in his late 30s. Good salary, owns a home in a decent market, has been contributing to his retirement account since his late 20s. By conventional measures, he is ahead. His net worth might be sitting at $420,000. He feels like the plan is working, but his monthly cash flow tells a different story. The mortgage on a house he bought at peak rates is expensive. 2 car payments, a kid in daycare, subscriptions he forgot he had. When you run the actual numbers, he is spending about $300 more per month than he earns. Every single month, his savings cushion gets a little thinner. His net worth looks fine. His cash flow is slowly bleeding. That is the thing about a snapshot. It does not show you the direction you're moving. It just shows you where you're standing when the picture was taken. Now, You might be thinking that this is just a budgeting problem. Spend less, earn more, close the gap. And look, that is not wrong. But it misses the deeper issue. Because the real question is not just whether your cash flow is positive, it is whether your cash flow is built on something stable, something that does not require you to keep showing up to maintain it. A paycheck is cash flow, but it is cash flow that stops the moment you stop working. That distinction between cash flow that depends on you and cash flow that does not is where this gets genuinely important. And when you start to look at what happens to people who never make that distinction, a pattern shows up. The same pattern over and over, because it turns out there is a very specific trap that high net worth creates, and one that is almost invisible until you are already inside it. Here is something that does not get talked about enough. You can do almost everything right. Save consistently, buy property, max out your retirement contributions, and still end up financially stuck. Not because you made bad decisions, because the goal you were given was incomplete. This is the net worth trap, and it is surprisingly easy to fall into. The trap works like this. As your net worth grows, it starts to feel like progress. And it is progress, in a narrow sense. But net worth does not tell you whether that wealth is doing anything for you right now. It does not tell you whether it is accessible. It does not tell you whether it is generating income. It just tells you that it exists. And for a lot of people, the wealth exists in forms they cannot actually use without a high cost or a significant weight. According to 2026 data from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, roughly 78% of American household net worth is concentrated in two places: primary residence equity and tax-advantaged retirement accounts. 78%? That means for the typical household, only about $1 in 5 of their total wealth is sitting somewhere they can actually reach without penalty, without selling their home, without triggering a tax event. The rest is locked. It looks like wealth. It functions like a display case. You cannot pay your electricity bill with home equity. You cannot cover a medical expense with the balance in your 401k without absorbing a 10% early withdrawal penalty on top of ordinary income tax. The wealth is real. The access is not. Watch how this plays out in practice. Consider a couple in their early 60s, a retired school administrator and a former logistics manager. They spent 35 years being genuinely responsible. They bought a home in the early 90s, paid it down steadily, and watched it appreciate. They contributed to their retirement accounts every year without fail. By the time they retired, their net worth was sitting at around $1.8 million. Impressive by any measure. But here's what their actual monthly picture looked like. Their home, now worth roughly $1.1 million, generated zero income. Their retirement portfolio, about $650,000, required careful, limited withdrawals to avoid pushing them into a higher tax bracket. Social Security covered some of it, but after property taxes, insurance, utilities, and the basic costs of maintaining a house that size, they were coming up short every month by around $600. They were millionaires who were watching their savings erode, slowly but consistently, with no real mechanism to stop it. That is not a budgeting failure. That is a structural one. They built wealth in the only forms they were told to build it. Nobody explained that net worth and accessible income are two separate things that require two separate strategies. And here is what makes this trap particularly difficult to see in advance. High net worth actually creates a feeling of security that can delay the realization that something is wrong. When you look at a statement showing $1.8 million, it is hard to feel urgency. The number is reassuring. It is only when you sit down and map out the monthly reality, what actually arrives, what actually leaves, that the gap becomes visible. By that point, the options for course correcting are narrower than they were 10 years earlier. The uncomfortable truth is that a large, illiquid net worth can actually mask a cash flow problem for years. It makes you feel protected, while the underlying monthly math quietly works against you. And the longer that goes unexamined, the harder it becomes to restructure. So if net worth is not the answer on its own, what is? This is where the thinking has to shift from accumulation to construction, because the people who avoid this trap are not necessarily the ones with the highest net worth. They are the ones who deliberately built something different alongside it, a cash flow engine, a system designed not just to hold value, but to generate it month after month, whether they are working or not. There is a version of financial security that has nothing to do with a big number on a statement. It is quieter than that, less dramatic, But the people who have it carry themselves differently. They do not check the market every morning. They do not run mental calculations every time an unexpected bill shows up. Something is simply taken care of, and they know it. That is not an accident. That is what a cash flow engine produces. The concept is straightforward, even if building it takes time. A cash flow engine is any collection of assets or income streams that generates reliable money regularly, money that arrives whether you work that week or not. It is not about getting rich quickly, and it is about constructing a system where the income side of your monthly equation is no longer entirely dependent on your continued presence and effort. What makes this different from just having savings is the word reliable. A savings account is not an engine. It is a reservoir. It holds what you put in, and it slowly drains when you take it out. An engine, by contrast, produces dividend-paying stocks that deposit income into your account every quarter, a rental property that generates a net positive after mortgage and expenses, a small portfolio of index funds generating distributions, a pension or annuity providing a fixed monthly payment. These are not the same thing as a pile of money waiting to be spent. They are mechanisms. They produce output. And here is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Think about two people, and both in their early 60s, both transitioning out of full-time work. The first is a former marketing director named Sandra. She retired at 63 with a net worth of just over $900,000. Most of it was in her home and her retirement accounts. She felt prepared, but within 18 months, she realized her monthly withdrawals from her portfolio were running about $4,200. Her Social Security had not kicked in yet, and every dollar she pulled out was a dollar that could no longer compound. The math was fine on paper. In practice, watching that balance drop every single month felt destabilizing. She went back to part-time consulting, not because she wanted to, but because the psychological pressure of drawing down a finite pool was more than she had anticipated. The second is a former high school principal named Marcus. His net worth at retirement was around $380,000, less than half of Sandra's. By traditional measures, he was less prepared. But Marcus had spent 15 years deliberately building income streams alongside his career. He had two modest rental properties generating a combined net income of about $2,100 a month after all expenses. His pension from the school district added another $1,900. Social Security brought in $1,400 more. His total monthly income at retirement was just over $5,400. His monthly expenses were around $4,800. He had a surplus. His $380,000 in savings was not a lifeline. It was a cushion. Marcus did not lie awake worrying about sequence of returns risk or what the market did in a given week. His bills were covered before he touched a single dollar of his savings. That is the emotional reality of a cash flow engine. It is not just a financial strategy. It is the difference between retirement that feels like freedom and retirement that feels like a slow countdown. A 2026 survey by the Employee Benefit Research Institute found that retirees with at least two guaranteed income sources beyond Social Security reported significantly higher financial confidence and meaningfully lower rates of anxiety around spending compared to those relying primarily on portfolio withdrawals. The mechanism matters, the structure matters, not just the total. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it reframes the entire project. The goal is not to accumulate the largest possible number. The goal is to construct enough reliable income that your savings become optional rather than essential. And the question that naturally follows is, how do you actually build that? Not in theory, but step by step. Because it does not happen by accident, and it does not require starting with a lot. It requires a specific sequence. That sequence is what the 5-step ladder is designed to show you. Nobody builds a cash flow engine in a single move. That is not how it works, and anyone who suggests otherwise is selling something. What actually happens is quieter and more sequential. It is a series of steps, each one making the next one possible. And the frustrating thing is that most people are already on the ladder. They just do not know it, so they never climb. The 5-step ladder is not a motivational framework. It is a description of how income actually compounds over time when you follow the logic in order. Step 1 is where almost everyone starts, and there is nothing wrong with it. You trade time for money, you work, you get paid. Your labor is the input, your paycheck is the output. This is the foundation. It is not the destination. And the mistake most people make at this stage is treating the paycheck as the goal rather than the raw material. Step 2 is where the leverage begins. You increase the margin. The margin is the gap between what you earn and what you spend, and it is the single most controllable variable in this entire process. Not your salary, which depends on your employer and your industry. Not the market, which depends on forces entirely outside your control. The margin. That gap is yours to manage. According to 2026 data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American household earning between $80,000 and $120,000 a year saves roughly 8% of their take-home income. 8%. That leaves almost no room to deploy capital, which is exactly why so many households at that income level feel like they are running in place. Widening the margin, even from 8% to 15 or 18, changes what becomes possible in the steps that follow. It does not require a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. It requires treating the margin as a non-negotiable output of every paycheck, rather than whatever happens to be left over at the end of the month. Step 3 is where the margin goes to work. You reinvest it into assets that generate returns without requiring your direct time. This is the actual construction phase. Dividend-paying index funds, a rental property with positive monthly cash flow after expenses, a small business interest. The specific vehicle matters less than the principle. You are converting saved time into deployed capital, and that capital starts producing income of its own. A 34-year-old nurse who puts aside $800 a month into a diversified dividend fund at an average yield of around 4% will be generating roughly $500 a month in passive distributions within about 12 years, without touching the principal. That is not retirement money. That is a growing second income, built on the margin from step 2. Step 4 is about removing yourself from the equation. You systemize it. You automate contributions so they happen before you can spend the money. You set up automatic reinvestment so dividends compound without requiring a decision. You structure rental income to run through a property manager if the time cost is too high. The goal here is to make the engine self-sustaining rather than dependent on your ongoing attention and discipline. Willpower is a limited resource. Systems are not. The moment your cash flow engine requires you to actively manage it every week, it starts competing with your time rather than freeing it. Step 5 is the one that sounds too simple to be worth saying. You repeat the cycle. You keep widening the margin. You keep deploying it. You let the compounding do what compounding does over years and decades. The boring truth about this latter is that it does not produce dramatic results in year 1 or year 2. It produces them in year 10 and year 15, when the assets you built in the early stages are generating enough income to meaningfully reduce what you need to earn from your time. That is the shift. At some point on the ladder, the income from your system starts to catch up with the income from your labor. And eventually, if you follow the sequence long enough, the system pays for everything. Which brings us to the place where this matters most. Because all of this, the margin, the assets, the automation, the compounding, only fully reveals its importance when you look at what retirement actually requires now. The old model of how to fund the last third of your life has quietly broken down, and most people will not notice until it is too late to change course. The retirement model most Americans are working from was designed for a different era. It assumed shorter retirements, more predictable expenses, and a financial system that rewarded saving in ways that no longer fully apply. Nobody updated the manual. Most people are still following the old instructions. Here is what those instructions say. Work for 35 or 40 years. Accumulate the largest possible nest egg. Retire, then draw it down gradually until either the money or your life runs out, whichever comes first. It is a simple model. It is also increasingly broken for the majority of people trying to use it. The numbers make this uncomfortable to ignore. According to 2026 data from the Federal Reserve, the median retirement savings balance for Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 is $185,000, not the average, which gets pulled upward by outliers. The median. That means half of the people approaching retirement in America have less than $185,000 saved. If that household spends $4,000 a month in retirement, which is modest by most urban and suburban standards, that nest egg is gone in under 4 years. Not depleted gradually, gone. And even for households that have saved significantly more, the drawdown model creates a specific psychological and mathematical problem that does not get discussed enough. The moment you stop working and start spending your savings, every dollar you withdraw is a dollar that can no longer compound. You are simultaneously shrinking the engine and running it at full output. That tension is what financial planners call sequence of returns risk. If the market drops 20% in your first 2 years of retirement, and you are pulling out 4% annually to live on, the damage to your long-term balance is not just additive, it is structural. You may never fully recover, even if the market rebounds strongly afterward. This is where the burn rate concept becomes essential. Your burn rate is simply what it costs to fund your life for 1 month. Housing, food, transportation, healthcare, insurance, everything. It is not a judgment, it is just a number. And if your only source of retirement income is a finite savings balance, your burn rate is the enemy. It is working against you every single month, regardless of what the market is doing. Now watch what changes when cash flow enters the picture. Consider two people, both retiring at 63 with identical savings of $600,000. The first is a former sales manager named Daniel. He has no additional income sources beyond his savings and a modest Social Security benefit of around $1,600 a month that he plans to claim at 65. In the meantime, his monthly expenses run about $4,300. He is withdrawing roughly $2,700 a month from his portfolio to cover the gap. At that rate, factoring in average market returns, his savings are projected to run out sometime in his late 70s. He is not reckless. He is entirely dependent on a finite pool. The second is a former physical therapist named Carol. Her savings are also $600,000. But over the previous 14 years, she built a cash flow engine alongside her career. She owns 2 rental properties, generating a combined net income of $2,200 a month. Her Social Security, which she also plans to claim at 65, will add another $1,800. Her total projected monthly income at that point is $4,000. Her monthly expenses are $3,800. Her $600,000 in savings sit almost untouched. It compounds. It grows. It becomes something she passes on rather than something she exhausts. Same starting balance, completely different trajectories. The only variable is whether retirement income was built as a system or left as a single shrinking pool. This is the real mindset shift. Retirement planning is not a savings problem. It is an income architecture problem. The goal is not to accumulate enough money to burn through. It is to build enough reliable monthly income that your savings become a reserve rather than a lifeline. Get that right. And the anxiety that defines so many people's retirement years simply does not have the same foothold. And when you pull back and look at everything covered here, the 2 metrics, the trap, the engine, the ladder, the retirement reframe, a few core principles start to emerge that are worth holding on to long after this video ends. Here is what this all comes down to. Net worth tells you what you have accumulated. Cash flow tells you whether you can actually live. Those are not the same measurement, and confusing them is expensive. A few things are worth carrying forward. Wealth that you cannot access is not security. It is scenery. The margin between what you earn and what you spend is the only raw material that builds real income over time. And a retirement funded by a shrinking pool is a very different experience than one funded by a system that keeps producing. The practical question to sit with is this. Look at your current financial picture and ask honestly, how much of what you are building is accessible, and how much of it is locked behind a penalty, a sale, or a wait? That gap is worth knowing now, while there is still time to adjust. There is a related question this raises that goes one level deeper. If cash flow is the goal, which assets actually produce it most efficiently at different stages of life, and are the ones most people choose the best ones for the job? That question has a more complicated answer than the financial industry tends to advertise. If this reframes something in how you think about your own financial picture, share it with someone who is still optimizing for the wrong number.